these new flavour compounds, particularly on the sugars, and they'll start caramelizing the sugars, so you'll get toffee notes and treacle notes. So these are parts of the building blocks you would find out of essentially from normal oak casks, and that will depend on the level of toasting you can do: light toasting, medium toasting, or heavy toasting. And the same in charring, you can do light charring, heavy charring, medium charring, heavy charring. And all of these will contribute to the kind of profile, the flavor richness that is present in the oak casks. And you come to the sherry casks, which we are very focused on, have been for a long time. And these casks are only toasted, so they don't have the advantage or disadvantage of being charred. So you're picking up a different kind of flavour from sherry cask. Like, for example, you'll get from the PX, you're going to pick up things like Christmas cake, and in the oral, so you're going to get classically raisins, sultanas, mocha, dark chocolate. And all of that is essentially bound into the components that are present in the wood and are capable of being extracted. So it wasn't without knowledge that we did a lot of the work in moving from one cask to another. All it provided for us was a different layer of building blocks that was going to deliver the kind of final product that was in our mind and what we had designed in terms of the personality we wanted for Banalki. A very interesting question, and probably a question that's right at the heart of the role that the blender plays and the relationship it will have with the distiller, because it's really important in terms of the kind of cask you're using, that the chemical profile of the spirit that's coming off the still has a kind of molecular body that is capable of resonating and interfacing with casks, particularly casks that are very rich in terms of the flavour components.
Very good. That leads us on to a question that's a little bit further down the line from David Bowman. You're mentioning the sort of chemical molecular makeup of the casks and charring and stuff. David Bowman's question was, how has your background in chemistry affected the way you make whiskey, or the way that, the way you make whiskey, the way you blend whiskey?
David, I'm not sure how to answer that question. The truth is that I suppose it drives to the heart of what is blending. Is it an art or a science? Is it interesting? Look, blending is something that you learn hugely over years of experience, both from successes and failures, I have to say. And a lot of what you do in terms of the spirit, the chemical structure of your new fill, and the relationship you want to have that with the wood is a lot of experience and instinct. And my kind of gut feeling is that blending and the ability to formulate the kind of flavour profile and the spirit from the maturation process is an art. Once you've achieved it, chemistry will certainly explain to you why it's happened. I think a lot of that was answering what I said in answer to the first question.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, David. Moving on to a third question. You have been experimenting with a whole host of wood finishes. Once the spirit inside has reached maturity and is bottled, what is it that we do at Glenallachie with the likes of our Chinkapin Virgin Oak or Coval Rye Quarter casks? And that question was coming in from Jim Brown.
Listen, Jim, it's a good question. And kind of casks like Chinkapin, not so much rye, but Chinkapin casks, and indeed one or two other Virgin Oak casks. We monitor these very, very closely and very carefully, because there's no question that you can overcook. These casks are rich. They have never had spirit in the barrel before, so nothing has been extracted from the wood. So we would monitor them very carefully and try as best to capture the liquid at the sweet spot. And once we have taken the whiskey from the cask, in reality, the second fill are interesting casks, because you can be much more bold with these casks and expect them to be providing maturation space for the whiskey for a much more extended period of time. And the ability for these second fill casks to overcook, it really just doesn't exist, but they can continue to deliver over quite a long period of time a lot of the flavours that you've experienced from the first maturation.
Excellent. Thanks very much for the question, Jim. Will we move on to our first whiskey, or would you like?
No, you move on. You can talk us through the first whiskey, Ronan.
So the first whiskey that we're trying this evening is our White Heather 15. So it's a blended whiskey. It is, yeah, our White Heather 15 years old, served at 46%, natural colour, non-chill filtered. What we do with White Heather is we have a relatively high malt content. We're at 47% malt, 53% grain. And we're maturing in a combination of American barrels and sherry butts with a combination of Pedro Jimenez puncheons and Oloroso puncheons as well, in a medium char, medium toasted American casks.
I think while you're nosing and tasting on it, it's worth just reminding that all of the whiskies in White Heather are matured, are double matured. First phase for about 12 years is in conventional casks like American barrels, maybe some second fill casks, and some sherry casks, maybe even second fill sherry casks. And after 12 years, we will take these and we'll move them into the second phase of maturation, which will include PX, Oloroso, and some virgin casks. And these are, I'm loath to say, turbocharged casks, but they do contribute in the final 3 years of the maturation period, as well as the marrying process happening. There is a significant amount, additional contribution, flavour-wise, from the second period of maturation.
And with all of our whiskies that we release, and White Heather included, McNair's included, that we'll try at the end, it's maturing on site at Glenallachie. It's blended at Glenallachie. It's something that we take pride in and bring it onto site, onto our Glenallachie site, and blending and really putting it together, and trying to produce a really quite a premium blended whiskey here.
Yeah, and from the blender's point of view, I think I've done this and focused this for quite a long time in a separate podcast. But from a blender's point of view, making a blended whiskey is kind of the ultimate challenge. And why, you might ask, is it's a choice of whiskies you want to use to create the personality. The choice of grain, from my point of view, the choice of grain is really, really important. We would always focus on grains like Strathclyde and Girvan, which, in my opinion, and I'm only expressing my own personal opinion from a blending point of view, they are kind of grains allow the real personality of the malt whiskies that you're introducing into the blend, allow their character to be expressed. And then you look to try and get the right balance, and that's all about the kind of cask being maturing and the cask you've chosen to mature them in. Again, these casks present significant part of the building blocks to achieve the ultimate blending experience. The White Heather as a blend is interesting. We were very keen to get it at the point of acquisition because not so long ago, maybe 20 years ago, it was a very significant brand in the marketplace in Europe, America, and South America, and it was a shame that a number of things had conspired to really make sure that the brand was taken off the shelf. So we were really keen and very proud to deliver what we've done today, and I'm sure Ronan can tell you a little bit of why we bottle at the high strength.
Yeah, so we bottle at 46%, and really that comes down to the fact that we don't chill filter any of our whiskies at Glenallachie. And yeah, to avoid that haze or sort of cloudiness within the bottle, usually through transport, or if you're storing it at a cold place, 46% really is the sort of last ABV you can bottle that. Otherwise, you're moving into sort of solution characteristics. This can't say that word. Solution characteristics issues in terms of sort of wanting to come, the liquid itself wanting to come out of solution characteristics.
I suppose it goes back to David Bowman's question, science, and it is all about it's about preserving the integrity of the whiskey. But and Ronan's right. There is for every liquid, we're talking about whiskey in this case, there's a thing called solution characteristic, and some of the high molecular weight flavour components, some of the high molecular weight esters, once you start dropping the temperature, once you get down somewhere near 46% or below 46, they start thinking, look, I'm very uncomfortable in this strength. I don't want to stay in solution. This is not for me. So they might precipitate in a cold environment, or they create a haze. So to avoid that, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with a haze or with a precipitate. It's a natural experience. It's not going to in any way to spoil the whiskey, but it doesn't present itself, in my opinion, properly. Should stay in solution. So we will always bottle at 46% or above.
Okay, so we'll move on to some more questions. And if anyone who has joined the stream tonight would like to ask some questions, please use the question and answer box, and we'll try and get round to the ones submitted this evening towards the end of the stream, and we'll carry on with some of the previously asked questions. So, after acquiring the distillery in 2017, the distillery went through some quite major process changes, in particular the extended fermentation time. And the question from Randy Sloan is Glenallachie pursuing any specific esters with the extended fermentation time and maturation approach?
I think the answer to that, Randy, is I think so. We haven't drilled into the kind of primary chemistry that's going on in the long fermentation. And what we do is at long fermentation up to 146 hours, by about 60, 65 hours, the yeast work is finished. And so you've got quite a benign wash sitting in the fermenter. We then would rouse it and introduce some oxidation. And our aspiration is there is going to be some movement in the aldehydes and in the some of the organic acids that might be present. I get the alcohols getting oxidized, the aldehydes getting oxidized, and the acids and the esters carrying out some esterification. But my own belief is that much of the secondary esterification happens actually during the maturation process. And I mean, for example, one of the very interesting features of a long fermentation for a malt whiskey, you might want to be looking for some pineapple notes. And it comes from a chemical called ethyl hexanoate, which unquestionably this will have been created at some point during the maturation process in cask. So I can't, in all honesty, give you a perfect answer, even or a well-constructed scientific answer. But what we can say is that we're pretty sure that long fermentation and the introduction of oxygen by rousing after the yeast process has been completed is good for the ultimate outcome. But from a pragmatic point of view, it's also good because you'll bring the wash to the still in a very benign state. So you're not going to you don't risk the problem of uncontrolled bubbling, which throws solids up into the neck of the still, and then you can get some actually burning on then, which gives you off odors that you would really are quite unwelcome. So there is some logic to the things we're trying to achieve.
So thank you very much for the question, Randy. Moving on, distilleries like ourselves love to try different cask types, different types of wine casks, fortified and unfortified wines, also STRs, maybe some second fills. As a master blender, what's your rule or method to specifically create a dram with layers of complexity and sort of a layer of different notes?
I think probably we've covered that in the answer to the first
Yeah.
question, but it's really important. It's really important that when you're choosing a variety of casks, that you, I was going to say religiously, but maybe it's the wrong word, but diligently follow the development of the whiskey in these casks, particularly if casks that are new to your particular distillery, understand how quickly and how effectively kind of flavour development that you're looking for is actually happening in the cask. So it really is a learning experience. And once you've got that kind of knowledge in your brain, it then gives you access to a whole variety of things. That these are the building blocks, and if you're putting, let's say, you're putting an expression together, you'll know that maybe I want 5% of this as a building block, 20% of that. So it's all about, it really is all about diligence, understanding what the norm is that these casks, each of these different styles of casks can contribute. And then when you put them all together, how do they interface? How much can you put into this spirit to not overcompensate, just to give you enough contribution of that particular flavour? And that really is trial and error, and we do a lot of that at Big One Alpha.
Look at some questions there. Since most of the product that's been released has been still always been the biggest challenge. That's a great. There we go. I'll ask that question there. Thank you, Aidan Marsh, for the question there. We'll answer it right away. Since acquiring the distillery, most of the product that has been released has been inherited stock from Chivas once they owned the distillery, with the exception of the limited edition Michael Tor. What has been the biggest changes in the distillation process that we see or taste as drinkers in the core spirit when we start to see your distillate in the core range? I think we've covered a little bit of it, and we're talking about longer fermentation times.
That's one of them. But from a distillation point of view, and I think I did actually at least allude to it, you have to understand the kind of full production and maturation cycle. And if our plan was always to create Glenallachie as the personality of Glenallachie as a quite a richly sherried experience. So really important that the new fill spirit, when we inherited the distillery, that we had to have a spirit that was muscular enough to actually cope going into wood that was pretty punchy in terms of the richness of the flavours that it would contribute. And I mean, off the record, maybe on the record, we certainly have taken the cut point down quite significantly to where the previous owner of the distillery had it. And that has been driven, all of that has been driven essentially by the need to make sure that the flavours from the wood don't overwhelm a light spirit, and that the muscularity of the spirit doesn't overcommand the flavours from wood. It's all about getting the balance right. And I have to say, the kind of changes we've made, we're very comfortable and very happy with. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks very much for submitting the question. Moving on, Victoria Robertson asks, what is the ideal length of time for whiskey to mature in a sherry cask? Is it 12, 15, 20 years? And does the angel share reduce dramatically through time?
It's a good question. And the question is, there is no ideal length of time. There's a variety of sweet spots in the journey of maturation, and you know, I can say to you that after, if you were doing a secondary maturation, taking the whiskey, let's say, from being 10 years in an American barrel and then moving on into a sherry cask, you will get a sweet spot somewhere after 3 or 4 years, and it will deliver some very interesting and very well balanced flavors. You can take it at that point, or you can allow it to continue to the next week's point, which could be another 3, 4, 5, 6 years. The reality is, sherry casks really don't overcook. They just move from one phase of flavour delivery to a richer and richer and richer. And you might get to a point where you say, well, that's enough. I have to say, in all my experience, I haven't reached that point yet, but who knows?
I guess it will come down to the length of time will come down to if you're filling into a first fill PX hogshead rather than a second fill PX butt.
Yeah.
And the maturation time with the wood contact that the spirit has will be significantly different.
It's a good point, Ronan. We should have mentioned it. And also, much of what I said will depend on the size of the sherry cask or indeed the cask. The sherry cask, if you're in a smaller cask, in a hogshead, the impact, the first impact will be quicker, you know, and when I'm saying maybe 3 or 4 years, you might actually be looking at 2 or 3 years. That might be enough for what somebody is looking for. But you move on to the next phase, and you always guardedly be following the development of these casks over whatever period you decide. It could be a very, very long period. And we've got some 1978 Malachy that's been in sherry cask from birth. It's wonderful. It's totally in equilibrium. And who knows, it might be in a bottle at some point.
I think that answers Rory Finnegan's question. What is the oldest cask you have that is unbottled? What is your oldest planned future bottling? Half of that question might get us into some trouble.
Yeah, I think we'll maybe just say we got some very nice 1978.
Interesting question here coming from Song Chi. Recently, I was informed that your distillery installed filters in the tube between washbacks and wash chargers to remove the lees. Would you please tell me if those filters were installed before or after you acquired the distillery?
They were installed before we acquired the distillery. And I have to say that the presence is helpful. It doesn't remove the finer lees. It will remove some of the chunkier lees. But it's helpful. Yeah.
Questions. So Andrew asks, why experiment with Scottish oak if it's high in tannins?
I'm not sure necessarily that Scottish oak is necessarily higher in tannins than similar or related genuses. One of the issues with Scottish oak is that it doesn't grow well. It doesn't grow in a straight line, and it doesn't grow high. The Coopers really don't welcome working with Scottish oak. There's not enough staves coming out of it, and there are too many knots in the tree. And actually, there are not any Coopers in Scotland actually that welcome working with Scottish oak, or indeed can work with Scottish oak. But from a genus and a local point of view, it was a worthy challenge to get the Cooper to create some Scottish virgin oak. And of course, the personality is not totally different from other genuses, but there are differences. And sure, the level of tannins will be one of them. But in our case, we wanted to showcase our whiskey in Scottish oak. We felt it was important to the category, maybe even important to the integrity of who we are and where we exist. Again, it was the casks were medium toasted and medium charred. And as with all virgin oak casks, you really have to monitor them very carefully because they can overcook. And if you miss the sweet spot, you're just going to have to grin and bear it and wait for the next sweet spot to come around. But happy to showcase the Scottish virgin oak, and we will continue to so do. And one of the disadvantages is that they're very expensive. You know, the classical virgin oak cask, be it Spanish, French, American, Hungarian, is around about £400 a cask. Scottish virgin oaks are around about £1,500 a cask. So it's a big number. I was going to say it's a big investment. It's not a big investment. It's the right investment. It's important that we can do something with Scottish virgin oak.
That leads us quite nicely, and thanks for the question, Andrew. That leads us quite nicely onto the 8-year-old Scottish virgin oak that we released last year. Matured in American oak ex-bourbon barrels for roughly around 5.5, 6 years, then been finished in Scottish virgin oak for the remaining 2 years. Released at 48%. Again, as I said before, no colour, no chill filtering, and produces quite a unique style. Glenallachie is rich with sort of butterscotch and vanillas. It's got a lovely citrus honey note in there as well.
Whisky, lactose, coconut. It's bottom there on the
48%. So again, we'll have tried this at cask strength, roughly around the 48 to 50% mark, and at 46%, and we've opted for 48%, mostly because we find that is the optimum flavour that's coming out there at 48%.
And we would encourage people to at least give this a try at 48% without adding ice or water. We think it's comfortable in the palate. In fact, we think anything we put in bottle should be comfortable in the palate. Even if we go to 56, 58%, we choose these strengths because we believe that that particular experience is going to work for you. And if it didn't, we wouldn't actually put it in the bottle of that strength.
I guess these two questions sort of fall in together from Julie Ingram and Tim Ingram, funnily enough. Which cask type is your favourite for blending? And what wood is your favourite to work with when aging your whisky, and why?
I think, let me answer the second question first. I have to say, in terms of the sherry casks, the one that delivers the fullest experience from a blending point of view, from a blender's point of view, is the Oloroso casks. And in my experience, they never disappoint. But we as a company, and myself and previous companies, have done a lot of work in virgin oak casks. And while they're more expensive, in terms of delivery, they're giving you a full experience because no spirit has been in them before, and so you have the whole the whole spectrum of flavors still resting in the wood, and so it gives you the richest possible opportunity. So an answer is, if it was a sherry cask, I would choose Oloroso. Not that I would choose, I would also choose PX, and of course, and the other sherry casks. But my favourite would be Oloroso. And in terms of the alternative casks, virgin oaks, wonderful to work with.
Thank you, Julie Ingram and Tim Ingram. Moving on, what are some of your goals for Glenallachie for the coming year or two? But more important, are there any experimental casks worth mentioning? Sorry for the pronunciation, but that's from Pierre-Luc Savaria.
Hi, Pierre. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say this, but without spilling the beans, we have been fascinated and delighted that we've been able to get a hold of some Japanese Mizunara casks, some of which have come in as Mizunara oak and have been fabricated in Speyside, and some of which have been fabricated in Japan. We've now probably about 3 or 4 years getting to better understand. I was going to be conceited and say better understand the kind of flavour deliveries that we're getting and we're expecting, but also getting from Mizunara. these casks are difficult to work for. They're very, very rich. They imbue some amazingly interesting, earthy, sandalwood, almost meaty notes to spirit. So you have to be very careful how you handle these casks. They are, and we're only in the learning process. We have learned some things, and the other ones that we're interested in, we started a little bit of work on, are Mongolian virgin casks. The reason is that Mizunara casks, and this, don't take this the wrong way, they are hugely expensive. You can pay up to £4,500 for a Mizunara barrel. So it's tasty. It's a tasty and a very, very rich investment and experience. Mongolian virgin oak is less expensive, still very expensive, but it's kind of in the same latitude, the same kind of sea terroir, environmental kind of climatic situation as Hokkaido. And we kind of encourage, we're hearing kind of snippets that some of the Japanese distillers are also beginning to use Mongolian oak as a possible alternative to or addition to Mizunara. So these are worthy experiments that are going on at the moment, and there will be a surprise in the near future with the Mizunara. But personally, we probably wouldn't release 100% Mizunara because it's big.
Too big, too rich, too bold.
It would probably come out with a partner like Oloroso.
You feel the balance between Oloroso and Mizunara would work?
It would work well.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much for the question. Where are we? Do you have any free time or liver to try much other whiskies from other distilleries? That's from Chandra Ori.
And the answer is occasionally. But normally it would not be as a comparative experience. It would be that, if I'm being honest, if I wasn't drinking Glenallachie, I would probably occasionally have a Ballantine's 12 or 15. Are you listening, Sandy? And listen, Johnny Walker Black never lets you down. These are moments in time where maybe I can't get access to Glenallachie. How awful. And or maybe I just need to try something else. So yeah, that's the answer.
Excellent. What questions have we got here? Favorite cast, I sort of answered that. From Daniel Caballero.
That's an interesting one, Ronan, from Andy Hunter. I think that's Andy Hunter from Five, who has an ongoing spat with our Falkirk Bairn. Hope that is you, Andy. Have you ever passed the point of no return with a refill cask? I've gone past the point of no return, but it wasn't a refill cask. It was with a Tokai cask, not at Glenallachie. It was the very early days of the ownership of Ben Riach, and it was our fault. But what we did was we left the Tokai casks external to the warehouse, probably in conditions that were too extreme for it. I think some water got in, and anyway, for whatever reason, there was a pronounced acetone note in the whiskey. And for those of you who don't know, Neil Vanish, that was not a good experiment. And I know there'll be a question as to how did we handle that? I think we moved it into a blended whiskey somewhere, a peated blended whiskey somewhere along the line.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy, for the question.
That's a good question. Daniel
Caballero. Would you ever use heritage barley varieties? I think maybe some newer, younger distilleries are really focusing in and trying to reproduce these sort of heritage barley varieties. Is it something that we're interested in doing?
The answer to that, Daniel and Ronan, yes, we would be interested in if we could retrace our steps and go back 40 years. it would give me great pleasure to work with Golden Promise. The reality is that almost all the varietals we're working with since Golden Promise are derivatives of Golden Promise. And I'll just make a point. You know, when I was at Ballantyne's, a kind of standard yield for, let's say, Golden Promise would have been something like 395 litres of alcohol per metric ton. Today, and some of the brands were, this is not a criticism. This is just an observation that the current varietals are delivering up to 425 litres of alcohol per metric ton. From our point of view, and from the kind of culture that we operate within, we're not driven by yield, we're driven by quality. 25 litres of alcohol per metric ton is of little significance to us in the bigger picture. We're much more driven and interested in the quality, the profile of the spirit, the profile of the wash that we get from the barley we're using it. And yes, the answer is yes. Where varietals, interesting varietals that have journeyed along the way to become available, sure, you would be interested in that.
Thank you for the question, Daniel. Is that Andy Hunter?
Yes, we're talking to Andy. Andy, just to let you know, the Falkirk Bairn is in the background somewhere.
What questions do we have that have come in? What do you think of terroir? We sort of covered that a little bit with the virgin cask question. Do challenges come with cask consistency in order to keep the Glenallachie flavour profile? That's coming in from Tom.
I think, Tom, the answer to that generally is yes, there's a challenge in terms of cask management. The challenge is less, however, the richer the cask you use, the less the challenge in terms of consistency. So, you know, looking at a fairly regular formula for us, you would be 85% sherry cask, 50, maybe it's 75% sherry, 15% virgin oak, and the balance would be a wine cask. So, and all these casks are coming in as very rich with flavour casks. They're not coming in as second fill casks. The big challenge, however, with new casks is that you store them properly. And for example, when we get the sherry casks that we bring in, we insist that the sulphur has been nowhere near these casks. So once the sherry is removed from the cask, they're immediately loaded onto the vehicle, come to the distillery, and our whiskey is in the cask within 2 weeks of the sherry being removed from the cask. No sulphur anywhere near these sherry casks. Similarly with wine casks, we have a conversation with the winery. Once they're dumped, they will be immediately on a vehicle, untouched, bunged, untouched on a vehicle, and with us, and the whiskey will be into it again within 2 or 3 weeks. So we do our best to ensure that the casks are not stored externally for any length of period of time, even in Scotland. And so we try and iron out some of these anxieties that do exist. But from a practical point of view, we run the business in such a way that we iron them out or remove them as quickly as possible before they could start to be a problem.
And I guess carrying on from Tom's question, I guess it goes back to that. Are we really looking for a consistency? Or are we constantly looking and evaluating our whiskies and trying to progress them in terms of flavour profile?
Well, we're not, you're right, Ronan, consistent. What we're looking for is to ensure that we eliminate the possibility of any bad things happening within the empty cask. Remove that possibility. But you're right, in terms of consistency, we're not consumed with consistency. It's not important to us. We're much more consumed or driven by the pursuit of excellence. So we would accept every batch of whiskey, every vatting we made of one of our releases, the next one's going to be better. And we're not constrained. We're not like some of the big boys who have got real issues in terms of they've got to have consistency. That's their mantra. That's what they're selling. What we want to sell is a product that is evolving all the time and getting better all the time.
There's a good question in there from Lindsay, and I guess it actually highlights a different point. Lindsay's question is, would you ever consider drawing less samples? I'm guessing that's coming from our warehouse manager, Lindsay. But I guess what that touches on is how often and how much are we looking at our stock that is sitting and maturing, and how much focus is given into constantly evaluating the stock that's maturing.
You've structured the question in the right way, and the answer to Lindsay's question is that the one certainty in life, Lindsay, is that once you answer that question, the number of samples will be doubled immediately. But there is actually a substance to the question, and Ronan's alluded to it. We follow the progress of the casks that we can see being part of the bottling experience over the next 3, 4, 5 years, to ensure that they're evolving and delivering the kind of flavour profile we're looking for. It's also the case that every time we have a vatting that's going to a bottling plant, we will prepare a pilot sample, a representative pilot sample of all the casks in the right ratio that will be going into the vatting. And if that is not equal to the last vatting or better than, then it has to be better or equal to the last one. Then we have to go and reinvent this vatting and improve it.
So to answer, Lindsay, no, we will not.
In fact,
we will not think about drawing less.
We'll be doubling them, Lindsay.
So, well, actually, that'll push our time. We're around 15 minutes left. So if anyone else has any other questions, please send them in. But I think we'll move on to our third whisky, which is a newly released whisky, quite a unique whisky for us at Glenallachie. As you've mentioned before, we focus quite heavily on using the sort of Oloroso Pedro Jimenez sherry casks, but we've actually decided to put some spirit into the 6 different sherry styles, ranging from Fino, Manzanilla, Amontillado, Palo Cortado, and then Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez. For this, we're looking at Fino. So you're around 7 years maturing in American barrels, and then been put into first fill Fino sherry hogsheads. And what you're really looking at here is quite a unique Glenallachie. It's sherried. It's got a lot of lovely sherried notes in terms of little notes of sort of cinnamon, orchard fruits coming through. But you start to get more of a little bit of a dryness, sort of green apple, poached fruits, citrus notes, butterscotch, baking spices in there as well. Fino is a very unique sherry style in the sense that it's completely matured under a floor, under a yeast, which stops any oxygen and stops any colour development within the Fino sherry. So that then presents a fairly golden sherry matured whisky, but still packed with lots of fruit, heather, honey, sort of vanilla extract in there as well.
Marzipan elements. And I'm actually thinking, I tasted it the other night, even a hint of mango. A big surprise. The Fino is a big surprise. I think both Ronan and I expected that there could have been an issue with it over drying the whiskey. The reality is it's gone in the other direction altogether.
It's not really picked up that sort of I guess it goes back to what you were saying earlier about experience, and you make mistakes, and that teaches you what you then know in the future. But we were sort of stepping into the unknown a little bit with the Fino. We expected one thing, but it's actually presented something completely different. So when we look to use Fino again, we have more knowledge and where that maturation journey will take us.
Nice surprise.
Daniel Cavallero again, another question. What's your thoughts about STR casks, the shaved, toasted and recharred casks?
Actually, very good question, and very contemporary question. Actually fascinated by them, and we're actually moving into these in quite a big way for new fill whiskey. And here's the deal: these STR casks have been previously they've been maturing wine, and wine at 15%. Again, we come back to the solution characteristics of the of the liquid or the spirit or the drink of the cask. Wine at somewhere between 12 and 50%. First, these casks are not, the wine casks are not charred either, they're only toasted. So the wine is only extracting from the wood these molecular components that can dissolve in alcohol at 15%. So the reality is, once the wine is removed, there is a huge package of flavour left in these oak casks. And once they go to the process of shaving, toasting, and recharring, we've removed most of the wine contribution that's left in the wood. So suddenly you've got to the equivalent of relatively virgin oak casks, probably French, Spanish, or American. We're using a lot of these in our new fill whiskey. I can't say for certainly where they will be in 5 years or 10 years, but I can tell you the results, the early results are absolutely terrific. And I wish I wasn't answering this question. There's too many people listening. The great casks.
Cecil Robbins asks a question there. Will you be releasing cask strength expressions of Michael Tor? Michael Tor is obviously a newly released peated spirit from the distillery, released in 4 different SKUs of 5-year-old, matured in sherry. The original was American oak, rye, and then we had the Chinkapin, which is a genus of American oak, and also we had the Turbo. But Cecil's asking about cask strength expressions of Michael Tor.
I think we would both agree, Ronan. The answer to that is yes. The question in aligning with is what age would that would these additional releases be, cask strength releases be? The truth is that we're still monitoring and understanding how Michael Tor is evolving during the maturation process and within the kind of Glenallachie environment, Glenallachie warehousing experience. But what I would say is that from an age point of view, and this is from my own experience, I can only express my own experience. The full peated expression, the full peated experience is best somewhere between 5 and 8 years. So you get the full Buna, you get the case of our Michael Tor, it's Scottish people using, so you don't get that kind of powerful medicinal notes, ivory notes. It really is a smoky, phenolic, burnt wood experience. So probably we would see somewhere around about 8-year-old would be a good age to bring out a cask strength. Not sure quite what the wood style would be because we're still evaluating that, but for sure it's on the radar.
I guess that leads us into a question we've had from Tom Cordiner. Is the use of peat in Speyside whisky a lost art or style? So within the Michael Tor, we've obviously tried to source peat from as local to the distillery as we possibly can. So we're using peat from the northeast, from Peterhead region. Is it a lost art style, the use of Speyside peat?
I think the question, Ronan, is the use of peat generally in drying out standard barley. Is that a lost art? I think that's the question that's been asked.
Yeah.
The answer is if we retrace our steps 100, 120 years, almost every Speyside or Highland whisky would have an element of peat in the spirit, because peat would have been one of the essential ingredients in the drying process. Indeed, there might even be more than just an element. There might have been a significant element. My suspicion it also would be, Ronan, it would be Scottish peat they would be using, and they wouldn't be shoveling it in from the island. So it might not have been quite as powerful in terms of, but it would be there. And so the answer is yes. I think probably from classic Highland and Speyside style, the peat has disappeared. Although I have to say, but when we acquired Ben Riach, there was some interesting peated Ben Riach. and I got some Altabane recently, and I'm pretty sure I picked up some quite interesting peated notes in Altabane. So it hasn't disappeared totally, but the use of cleaner fuels, and I use that word advisedly, but the use of readily and easily available fuels for drying the malted barley, like gas and oil, yeah, I mean it's changed the kind of landscape from where it was 180, 100, 120 years ago.
There's a couple of questions up, Nicole. There you go. What would your desert island Glenallachie be? You'd have an unlimited supply and just one type.
Okay, that's a hugely unfair question. If it was only the 12 and the 15, life would be okay, I can tell you. Some of the work we're doing in the sidelines at the moment, and we've mentioned one or two of the interesting projects. If they deliver the kind of results that I think they will, then they would definitely be on the island. But anything with a GA would do me.
Excellent. You're welcome, Lindsay. No, we'll move on to it. I'm just filing through the questions, see what we can.
I'll just keep it anyway. Cool.
Jim Brown asks, your fermentation time is 146 to 160 hours. Would you ever experiment with timings, or is that set in stone?
No, Jim, nothing's set in stone. Even 146 hours was, you would have to say, an experiment, because there are challenges in terms of fermenting for 146 hours, not the least of ensuring that the hygiene of the experience is protected. And that means that your actual hygiene within the whole distillery, but particularly around about the mash tun and the fermenters, is you have to be acutely aware. They have got to be absolutely hygiene clean, or you'll have real problems with 146 hours. Listen, we've gone as long as 200, 240, 220 hours, and very, very comfortable with the organoleptic experience.
So around about 5 minutes left, we'll move on to our last whiskey here, which is our McNair's Lumreek, 10-year-old cask strength, batch number 2. It is a blended malt, combination of 2 Islay single malts, another Speyside, and obviously contains a portion of Glenallachie. It's matured in sherry casks, wine barriques, and some virgin oak casks. The question with the Lumreek is, when putting together, what is the difficulty in putting together Islay single malts, which obviously have a very distinctive peat reek to them, and adding in the fruity, floral, butterscotch, Glenallachie and Speyside single malts?
You know, that's such a complicated question, Ronan. The answer is that, you know, you have an objective target, and you know what you're going to get from the Glenallachie contribution, the style of cask you're going to use. We're familiar with the other Highland Speyside malts that are going in. And from the Islay, we didn't want to overload it. We wanted to make this a kind of gentle introduction, a gentle experience. So we didn't want the Islay whiskey to overwhelm or overpower all of the other flavour components that we had, you know, carefully planned to be part of the whole experience. And I think we got there. But blended malt whiskey it's a complicated experience. You know, it's you know, educating the consumer on blended malt whiskey is not easy, and it's a journey we've just started, and we'll work hard to make sure that Lumreek is allowed to fulfil its full potential.
Excellent. Go for one last question before we finish off there. To Edward Friday, quick and easy answer. Is the Glenallachie within Limerick peated, or if not, what style? It is not peated. The Glenallachie in Limerick is not peated, and it's matured, split across the sherry, wine, and virgin oak casks that go in to make up the recipe, I guess, of the Limerick 10-year-old. Aidan Marsh, final question. There we go. The Fino cask release is absolutely fantastic whiskey. That's the only reason I did this. I recently tried it when I was tasting event in Edinburgh. Having seen what this has done with the core spirit, any early ideas what else you would like to do with this type of matured spirit? Core range, mixed matting, higher age statement, or within the core range? I think the question is, are we set on the cask types we're currently using, or if something like the Fino, which gives us quite a big surprise, presents really lovely flavours, does it start to make its way into the conversation of something we more regularly use?
It's a complicated question. We don't want to overcomplicate the offer for imported distributors. It makes life difficult and complicated for them. But when we come across, the idea about let's branch out into using different styles of sherry casks outside of the kind of well-known PX and Oloroso. And the Fino, the first releases, the Fino, the Amontillado, and the Oloroso, we think has been a great experience. Lots of surprises for us too. I have to tell you that, and that's fair. Sometimes you get super duper surprises, and the Fino was, and I think also the Amontillado is a terrific experience. The next releases, the next part 2, the Polcortado, the Manzanilla, and the PX, there's some wonderful surprises in there too. But in answer, it's likely we will only use casks that are fascinatingly different now. And I think that's the direction. We've got to be fair to our importer distributors and make life a little bit less complicated for them. Learn a lot from what we've done and just rationalise what we're doing. But if there's an interesting idea, like we did with the virgin oak cask, when we did Hungarian, we did Spanish, we did Chinkapin. In the background, there's also some very interesting, like Ozark, very interesting. And we'll continue to look at these. We've got some Mongolian coming through. We'll get some Andean Colombian oak. So there's a lot of interesting ideas still fermenting away and maturing away. And when it's appropriate, and if it's appropriate, we'll bring them to the market.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks very much for the submitted questions, and thanks for the live questions that have come up. Thank you very much for myself.
Thank you, and I apologise for my voice, but it's almost back to normal.
There we go. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Night.